everyone and welcome back. 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. This is Jiwon and you're listening to Understanding Korea, one story at a time, where we explore Korean history, culture, and the very specific ways they quietly shape our everyday lives. Today's episode is a companion to this week's newsletter, which is about Korea's postpartum care, 산후조리, and what happens when an ancient cultural instinct gets turned into a modern industry. If you've already read the newsletter, I promise you, there is a lot more here. Today we are going deeper, going wider, and one point we are going to have a conversation that I think deserves to be said out loud. And if you haven't read this week's piece yet, the written version has something the audio doesn't. My own personal story of trying to build a Korean postpartum recovery from scratch in America, 11 months of it, which 2 sets of grandparents flying in from Korea, and a lot of seaweed soup. It's in the newsletter. Go find it after this. But first, a quick word of genuine thanks. Last week's episode and newsletter sparked one of the most meaningful conversations I've had with this community. Your responses genuinely made me rethink things I thought I understood. I'm going to weave some of those voices into today's episode as we go. So thank you. 정말 감사합니다. Okay, let's get into it. If you were with us last week, you already know the basics. The word 산후조리 breaks down into 산후, after birth, and 조리, to care for, to regulate. Together, it means the careful, deliberate management of a mother's body in the weeks after she gives birth. Warmth, rest, the right foods, and a clear cultural understanding that this period matters. The rules, if we want to call them that, follow a consistent internal logic. Stay warm always. Cover the body. Eat warming, nourishing food. Seaweed soup, 미역국 famously, because it's rich in iodine and calcium, both important for postpartum recovery. 도가니탕, rich in ox knee bone broth, is another traditional recommendation. Don't do housework, don't go back to your regular life too soon. Now, this one, don't do housework, has historically been the hardest rule to actually follow. Because, as many readers reminded me last week, a lot of Korean mothers a generation ago did not get this rest. They got up and went back to the kitchen. The ideal existed. The reality was often different. That gap between what women were supposed to receive and what they actually got has been part of Korean women's lives for a very long time. But here is what matters about this tradition and what I want to carry into the rest of today's conversation. It encoded in culture and in practice a recognition that childbirth depletes a woman's body profoundly, and that recovery is not optional. It is necessary. Korean folk wisdom said this clearly, even when the system around it failed to deliver. The question this episode is really about is what happened when that cultural recognition met modern life. As I was working on this week's material, something kept nagging at me, a thread I wasn't pulling hard enough on. We talk a lot about postpartum care, the food, the rest, the support systems, but we talk about it mostly in terms of recovery. And I think that framing, which is accurate, actually undersells what it is we are recovering from. So let me say it directly. Childbirth is an act women perform at risk of their lives. That needs to be said out loud. And it needs to be said not as a dramatic statement, but as a simple, accurate description of biological reality. The pain of pregnancy is real and often severe, and it is systematically minimized. Morning sickness, for instance, is routinely treated as a minor inconvenience, but for many women, it is debilitating, clinically, dangerously so. There are women who spend months unable to keep food down, losing weight, developing complications, comparing it afterward to the worst physical suffering they have ever experienced. And they are told, "You're pregnant, it will pass." Pregnancy can activate the dormant conditions. It accelerates cell growth throughout the body, which means that in women who are already carrying something fragile inside them, something can tip. Liver disease, cancer, conditions that had been quiet, that are no longer quiet. Jihyun, the co-author of this newsletter, lived this. She was a hepatitis carrier. During her pregnancy, the virus became active. Her liver enzyme levels climbed past 750. From there, cirrhosis, and from there, liver cancer. The illness that changed the course of her life had been triggered by the act of carrying a child. I think about that every time someone uses the word routine to describe pregnancy. I think about the women who go into pregnancy healthy and come out the other side permanently changed. I think about the women who don't come out the other side at all. These are not theoretical scenarios. They happen. They happen to ordinary women, to young women, to women surrounded by people who had no idea anything was wrong until everything was. Modern medicine performs daily miracles that we have completely normalized. We have normalized them so thoroughly that we now expect women to just get up and get back to it because, after all, the surgery went fine. The birth was uncomplicated. You are both healthy. As one comment indicated last week, if men were the ones who gave birth, if this were something that happened to male bodies, I do not believe the world would treat it as lightly as it does. I do not think we would call it bouncing back. I think we would call it what it is, survival followed by recovery. And this connects directly to everything we are talking about today. A culture that dismisses postpartum recovery has to be asked a very uncomfortable question. Does it actually believe that what just happened to this woman's body was significant? Or does it believe she was simply performing a function, and the function has been performed, and now she can go back to being useful? The culture of 산후조리, at its best, answers that question the right way. It says, yes, what you just did was significant. You deserve time. You deserve care. You are not a means to an end. The rest of this episode is about what happens when you try to build that answer into institutions, and what gets lost and what gets distorted along the way. Let's fast forward to the 1990s because something important happened. Korea was modernizing rapidly. Extended families were shrinking. Grandmothers were no longer always available or nearby. More women were working. And the old village-based, family-centered model of postpartum care, where the new mother would be surrounded by female relatives who cooked, cleaned, and held the baby, was becoming harder to sustain. Someone looked at this situation and thought, What if you could institutionalize that care? What if there was a place you go for 2 weeks where all of it was provided for you? The first commercial 산후조리원 postpartum care center appeared around 1996. By 1999, there were already hundreds of them. The concept spread with remarkable speed because it was solving a real and pressing problem. By 2024, 85.5% of Korean mothers had used one, from zero to near universal adoption in less than 30 years. That is an extraordinary cultural shift. Think about what it required. It required Korean society to collectively agree that postpartum recovery was serious enough to industrialize, to build a professional infrastructure around it, to normalize spending significant money on it. That didn't happen in most countries. It happened in Korea, and it happened fast. First, let me tell you what actually goes on inside one of these places. A typical 산후조리원 stay runs about 12 to 13 days. You check in shortly after birth, either from the hospital directly or within the first few days. Here is what a day looks like. The baby sleeps in a communal nursery staffed by trained nurses. This is the key feature. The mother has her own room. The baby is cared for at night, fed, changed, soothed, while the mother sleeps. 3 meals a day appear, warm and nutritionally designed for postpartum recovery. Supplementary programs include gentle postpartum exercise classes, massage therapy, sometimes traditional Korean medicine consultations. Lactation consultants are on hand. The mothers can request the baby be brought to her room for feeding and bonding. Then the baby goes back. Then the mother sleeps again. I mean, I understand why women describe this as heaven. But here's where it gets interesting. When I went through dozens of real Korean mothers' first person accounts while preparing for this episode, I found that the experience was described in dramatically different terms depending on who was telling the story. Some women used words like paradise, salvation, the best 2 weeks of my life. One wrote, "It was the first time since becoming pregnant that I felt like someone was actually taking care of me." Others used words like prison, isolating, suffocating. Here's why. There is a structure to the joriwon that not everyone experiences as liberating. The pumping bells ring every 2 to 3 hours around the clock. You are summoned for nursing, for classes, for consultations. Some facilities have strict rules about when you can hold a baby, what you eat, what temperature you maintain in your room, what you wear on your feet. Visual restrictions are real. And then there is the CCTV, surveillance camera situation, which I find genuinely fascinating as a story about how good intentions produce bad outcomes. Some joriwons installed cameras in the nursery so that mothers could check on their babies at any time through an app or monitor. The thinking was reassurance, peace of mind. What actually happened in practice? Mothers lay awake at 2 a.m. watching the screen, unable to sleep, noticing everything, worrying about everything. The technology of surveillance defeated the entire purpose of being in the joriwon. You are there to sleep, and the sleep tool became the anxiety tool. This is one of those details I think is so telling. Care, genuine, well intentioned care, can still be organized in ways that create new forms of pressure. Let me share a few real voices from Korean mothers' accounts I gathered in my research. I'm paraphrasing rather than reading directly. One woman described her joriwon experience as transformative. The food, the sleep, the expert breastfeeding help. She said she went in terrified and came out feeling, for the first time, like she might actually be able to do this. Another woman, she'd had a C-section, said that joriwon was the only place where she felt her surgery was being treated with appropriate seriousness. The staff helped her manage her incision. No one expected her to just get up and function. She felt seen as a patient. But another woman described feeling constantly monitored and judged. She wanted to hold her baby more than the schedule allowed. She left early. And someone else wrote something I have been thinking about ever since. The joriwon was wonderful, she said. But the moment she got home, the support evaporated entirely. 12 days of structured care, and then nothing. Back to the reality of a small apartment, a husband who tried his best but didn't quite know what to do, and a baby who had not received the memo about schedule. This is a pattern that shows up repeatedly. The joriwon as an island of care in what is otherwise a fairly under-supported landscape. Great while it lasts, but the border between the island and the mainland can be a hard cliff to fall off. I want to talk about something I think is genuinely one of the most interesting social phenomena in contemporary Korean parenting culture. It's called jodong, short for joriwon 동기, meaning your postpartum center cohort, the woman who gave birth around the same time and recovered in the same facility. This should not produce lasting bonds. These women have nothing in common. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of the city. They are thrown together by the narrowest possible coincidence. They all had babies at roughly the same time. And yet, these bonds last. Women who met in a joriwon when their babies were days old are still meeting for dinners years later, still texting each other at midnight when their child does something alarming, long after anyone would have expected the connection to fade. Why? I think it comes down to this. The joriwon is one of the few adult spaces where vulnerability is not successfully concealed. You have just had your body turned inside out. You do not know what you are doing. Everyone around you is in exactly the same situation. There is a kind of radical honesty that happens in that setting that is very hard to manufacture in normal adult life. The relationships formed there were formed before anyone put the armor back on. During COVID, joriwons restricted visitors and group gatherings, and jodong culture moved online to group chats and video calls. The connection persisted even when the physical proximity couldn't. That tells you something about what the relationship is actually made of. But jodong is not universally wonderful. Some accounts I read described jodong groups eventually becoming spaces of comparison. Whose baby hit milestones faster? Whose child got into which school? The group formed in radical equality can become, over time, another arena for the very pressures Korean parenting culture is already saturated with. So sometimes a lifeline, sometimes a beautifully intense friendship that lasts decades, and sometimes eventually a group chat you quietly mute. Let me take a few minutes for something the newsletter didn't quite have room for. How Korean postpartum care actually compares to what other cultures do. Korea is not alone in having a strong postpartum tradition. What's remarkable is how many cultures developed some versions of this independently, and how differently modern societies have treated those traditions. I'm going to mention a few of them by name today, and I will do my best with the pronunciations. Though I want to say upfront, I speak Korean with full confidence, English with great enthusiasm, and everything else entirely at my own risk. So please bear with me. China has Yuezi, sitting the month, a full month of structured rest and recovery with specific foods and family support. China has also seen the rise of commercial postpartum care centers that serve a similar function to Korea's joriwon. Japan has satogaeri bunben, literally returning to one's parents' home to give birth. Traditionally, Japanese women return to their childhood home for the final weeks of pregnancy and the postpartum period, where their own mother cared for them. The practice has declined with urbanization, and Japan has recently begun developing postpartum hotel services. The Netherlands, and this one I find genuinely inspiring, has kraamzorg. It is a professional postnatal home care provided to every new mother as a legal right. A trained maternity nurse comes to your home for about 8 days after birth for several hours each day. She helps with breastfeeding, checks the mother's recovery, cares for the baby, helps older children, sometimes does light household tasks. This is not a luxury service. It is a universal public entitlement. Let that sink in for a moment. In the Netherlands, professional postpartum home care is a right, not a product. In the United States, the norm is that you leave the hospital somewhere between 24 and 48 hours after delivery, and then you figure it out. No federal paid parental leave, no universal postpartum home care, no cultural expectation of a recovery period. The dominant message, if there is one, is bounce back. This is not a natural law. It is a choice, and it is a choice that has costs. Now I want to come back to Korea because the picture there is more complicated than Korea figured it out. When you look at the joriwon industry closely, what you see is a system that has genuinely institutionalized the idea of postpartum recovery, but then handed that institution over to market to run. And markets, left to themselves, tend to stratify. By mid-2024, the most expensive joriwon in Seoul Gangnam district was charging over 40 million won for 2 weeks, about $27,000. The cheapest facilities existed at a fraction of that. The ratio between the most and least expensive centers was 30-30 to 1. Not a gap, a canyon. Korea has approximately 21 public joriwons. Government subsidized facilities with more affordable pricing. For a country with roughly 230,000 births per year and 460 total postpartum centers, 21 public options is a very small number. The waitlists are long. Some mothers start trying to book before they have even told the people they are pregnant. Seoul has started offering 1 million won vouchers, about $670, to help offset joriwon costs. The government introduced a new ABC quality rating system for centers starting this year, 2026. These are meaningful steps. But they also reveal the gap between the cultural consensus. Of course, mothers deserve to recover properly, and the structural reality, how much you recover and in what conditions, depends significantly on how much you can pay. Korea turned postpartum recovery into infrastructure. The problem is that infrastructure tends to serve best those who can most easily pay for it. That's not a Korean problem specifically. That's what happens when care becomes a commodity almost anywhere. Korean postpartum care is now traveling. In New York City, a postpartum retreat has been written up by the New York Times with rates reaching $1,000 a night. In Los Angeles, Korean style 산후조리 services, both facility based and in home, are being found and used by non Korean families who simply encountered the concept and thought, wait, this is available? The same thing happened in Washington state, where I live, and where I personally used the Korean postpartum caregiver service when I had my daughter. The woman who ran the agency told me they were getting more non Korean clients every year. That pattern is interesting for two reasons. First, it shows that the logic of postpartum care, not the specific cultural trappings, just the basic premise that a new mother needs support and shouldn't have to improvise alone, resonates across cultures when people encounter it. Second, it shows that in the absence of public systems that provide this support, private markets will fill the gap, but only for those who can pay, which means that the spread of Korean style postpartum care in the US is simultaneously a beautiful thing and a symptom of failure. Beautiful because some mothers are getting care they desperately needed. A symptom because they are getting it as a luxury product rather than as a social guarantee. I want to return to something I raised at the beginning of today's episode. The idea that childbirth is an act women perform at risk of their lives, because I think it has a direct and uncomfortable connection to what is happening in Korea right now. Korea's birth rate is among the lowest in the world. When people discuss why Korean women are not having children, the conversation usually goes toward the housing costs, career pressures, education anxiety. All of those things are real. But here's another answer, and it is less comfortable. Women know. Not always explicitly, not always consciously, but they know. They know what pregnancy costs a body. They know what birth asks of you. They have watched their mothers, their friends, their own bodies. And when a society meets that knowledge with a shrug, with the expectation that you bounce back, go back to work, stop complaining, some women do the math and decide the terms aren't acceptable. There is a phrase that captures a certain kind of thinking that I find worth naming directly. The idea that the risks of pregnancy and birth are simply not discussed very openly. Because if they were, fewer people would choose it. That this silence is somehow necessary. I think that is exactly backwards. I think the silence is the problem. Women are not fragile. They can handle the truth. What they cannot handle, what no one should have to handle, is being expected to take on enormous risk while being told it isn't really that big a deal. This is not unique to Korea. It is a universal dynamic that Korea is experiencing in a particularly concentrated form. The societies that will figure this out are not the ones that pressure women harder to give birth. They are the ones that start treating what birth actually is, with honesty, with infrastructure, with something that looks like respect. A mother recovering from childbirth is not recovering from a minor inconvenience. She is recovering from a major physiological event that in previous centuries killed women at alarming rates, and that even now, with modern medicine performing daily miracles, carries real serious risks. Women deserve to say that out loud, and they deserve systems that take it seriously. Korean folk wisdom encoded that truth in the word 산후조리 centuries ago. The clinical language, the fourth trimester, matrescence, postnatal depletion, is still catching up. But wisdom, however correct, is not the same as infrastructure. And infrastructure, however present, is not the same as equity. The question I want to leave with you today is this. What would it mean to treat postpartum recovery not as a product, not as a tradition, not as a favor, but as a right? Not bouncing back, not performing readiness, not providing that you have already forgotten what your body just did. Just time, warmth, someone at the door with food, a room where mothers sleep. That is everything for today. If you want to go deeper, this week's newsletter has the written version of many of these ideas, plus sections that didn't make it into today's episode, including my personal story of building a Korean-style postpartum recovery in America, which involved a very organized family, a lot of seaweed soup, and 11 months of careful relay work between 2 sets of grandparents and 1 very generous employer. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, with a mother, with anyone who has ever been handed a tray with 1 slice of ham and told that was sufficient. Next week, we are doing something slightly different, a detour, a surprise. We are going to talk about 얼죽아, short for 얼어 죽어도 아메리카노. I would rather freeze to death than give up my iced Americano. No, this is not a coffee episode. Well, it is a little bit a coffee episode, but it's really about something else entirely. Something about identity, stubbornness, and what it means to insist on cold things in cold weather. See you next week. 오늘도 들어주셔서 감사합니다. 다음 주에 만나요. Take care everyone. Bye.